Every morning at exactly 6:05 a.m., the dog appeared. Nobody knew where he came from. Nobody knew where he went afterward. Yet for nearly 2 years, commuters arriving at Chicago's Union Station witnessed the same strange ritual. A homeless old man named Walter Hayes would wake up beneath a covered walkway beside the station, and beside him sat a paper bag containing fresh food. Sometimes it was a sandwich, sometimes soup, sometimes fruit and bottled water, and every single time, a golden retriever was the one delivering it. The mystery fascinated everyone who worked near the station. Security guards tried following the dog. Taxi drivers tried. Even police officers tried. Nobody ever discovered where he lived. Then one bitter January morning, the dog failed to appear. Walter waited. One day passed, then another. By the third day, the old man was visibly worried. He's never missed a morning. Walter told a young reporter named Emily Carter. That afternoon, Walter disappeared too. 3 days later, the dog returned alone, carrying something nobody had ever seen before. Around his neck hung a small leather pouch. Inside was a photograph, an address on Chicago's South Side, and a handwritten message that would uncover a secret someone had spent nearly 10 years hiding. Before the week ended, an entire city would learn who had really been feeding Walter all those years, and why a loyal dog refused to let his owner's final promise die. For most people passing through Chicago's Union Station, Walter Hayes was invisible. Thousands of commuters rushed through the station every morning without ever noticing the elderly man sleeping beneath the covered walkway near the east entrance. At 78 years old, Walter had become part of the scenery. People saw the blanket, the shopping cart, and the weathered face. Then they continued walking. Few ever stopped long enough to learn his name. Walter had not always lived on the streets. 30 years earlier, he worked as a maintenance supervisor for a manufacturing company on Chicago's South Side. Before that, he served 4 years in the military. He married young, raised 2 children, and spent most of his life believing he would retire quietly beside his wife in a small house outside the city. Life had other plans. His wife died after a long illness. Medical bills consumed their savings. The factory where he worked eventually closed. His health began deteriorating. Relationships with family became strained. One setback led to another. By the time Walter turned 75, he had lost nearly everything except his pride. That pride was one reason he rarely accepted charity. When volunteers offered food, he often refused unless he could help carry supplies or clean afterward. When people offered money, he usually declined. Walter preferred conversation over handouts. Then Buddy arrived. The first time happened nearly 2 years earlier. Walter woke one morning to find a golden retriever sitting quietly beside him. A brown paper bag rested on the ground between them. Inside was a turkey sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. There was no note, no explanation, and no owner. Walter assumed the dog belonged to someone nearby. He looked around, expecting a person to appear. Nobody did. The dog simply wagged his tail once and trotted away. The next morning he returned, and the morning after that. Soon the deliveries became part of Walter's routine. Every day at exactly 6:05 a.m. Never early, never late. Always the same dog. Always fresh food. Always gone before anyone could follow him. The strange ritual slowly attracted attention. Employees from nearby coffee shops began watching for Buddy every morning. Security guards started greeting him by name. Bus drivers recognized him. Even commuters who never spoke to Walter often paused to see whether the mysterious dog would appear. Eventually, the golden retriever became almost as famous as Union Station itself. Yet nobody knew where he came from. Walter tried following him several times. Every attempt failed. Somehow the dog always disappeared into the maze of Chicago streets. After a while, Walter stopped trying. He simply accepted the mystery and looked forward to seeing Buddy every morning. Then Emily Carter entered the story. 28 years old and working for a local newspaper, Emily spent most of her days searching for stories hidden beneath the noise of city life. One icy December morning, she noticed a crowd gathering near the station entrance. Curious, she walked over and saw Buddy placing a paper bag beside Walter before trotting away. "What was that?" she asked a nearby security guard. The man smiled. "That's Buddy. Whose dog is he?" "Nobody knows." Emily laughed. "Seriously?" "Seriously." The guard pointed toward Walter. "That dog's been feeding him for almost 2 years." Emily stared. "And nobody knows who's sending the food?" Not a clue. For the next several weeks, Emily returned almost every morning. She interviewed station employees, business owners, police officers, and homeless residents throughout the area. Every answer led to more questions. Nobody knew where Buddy lived. Nobody knew who prepared the meals. Nobody knew why Walter had been chosen. The mystery only deepened. Then winter tightened its grip on Chicago. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snowstorms rolled across the city. One particularly brutal morning, Emily arrived before sunrise expecting the dog to stay home. Instead, Buddy appeared exactly on schedule, carrying a larger paper bag than usual. Inside were hot soup containers, thermal gloves, hand warmers, and a knitted winter hat. At the very bottom sat something Walter had never received before. A handwritten note. Walter unfolded it slowly. 6 words were written in neat blue ink. "Stay warm. I'll see you tomorrow." Emily's heart raced. For the first time, there was proof. Someone was watching. Someone knew Walter existed. Someone had been quietly caring for him from a distance all these years. She immediately photographed the note and began investigating every possible lead. Yet before she could uncover anything, something unexpected happened. 3 weeks later, Buddy failed to appear. Walter waited through the entire morning. No dog. The following day came. Still no Buddy. By the 3rd morning, even the station employees looked concerned. Walter sat quietly beneath his blanket, staring toward the street where the golden retriever normally appeared. "He's never missed a day," he told Emily. The old man's voice sounded different. Worried, almost frightened. Emily tried reassuring him. Maybe the weather slowed him down. Walter slowly shook his head. No. He kept staring toward the horizon. Something's wrong. Neither of them knew how right he was. Because at that very moment, several miles away on Chicago's south side, a secret that had remained hidden for nearly 10 years was about to surface, and Buddy was desperately trying to lead someone to it. The 4th morning arrived colder than the previous 3. Snow covered the sidewalks surrounding Union Station. While commuters hurried through the freezing darkness, Walter Hayes sat beneath his usual spot, wrapped in 2 donated blankets, staring toward the street where Buddy always appeared. Emily Carter stood nearby, holding a cup of coffee she had no interest in drinking. The mystery that once felt charming now felt unsettling. 4 days without Buddy. 4 days without any sign of the dog. 4 days without answers. Then, at exactly 6, Nol Ima A.M., Walter suddenly stood up. There, Emily turned instantly. A golden shape emerged from the swirling snow at the far end of the sidewalk. Buddy. The dog moved more slowly than usual. His fur was dirty. One side of his coat appeared wet. Most alarming of all, he carried no paper bag. "Buddy," Walter called. The dog's tail wagged weakly as he approached. Several station employees stopped what they were doing to watch. Relief spread across Walter's face. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal again. Then Emily noticed the leather pouch hanging from the dog's collar. "What's that?" she asked. Walter crouched and gently removed it. The pouch was old and weathered. It looked handmade. More importantly, it had never been there before. Walter opened it carefully. Inside were 3 items: a photograph, a folded piece of paper, and a small brass key. Emily immediately leaned closer. The photograph showed an older man standing beside a much younger Buddy. Both appeared happy. The picture had clearly been taken years earlier. Walter stared at the man's face. "I've never seen him before." Emily unfolded the paper. Written in neat handwriting was a single address located on Chicago's south side. Beneath the address sat 7 words. "Please come. He needs your help." Silence settled between them. Walter looked at Emily. Emily looked at Walter. Then both looked at Buddy. The dog stared back, waiting. "This isn't random," Emily said quietly. Walter nodded. "No." Buddy barked once. The sound echoed across the station entrance. "I think he wants us to follow him," Emily said. Walter slowly stood. "Then we'd better go." Less than an hour later, Walter, Emily, and Buddy were traveling south through Chicago. The address led them far from downtown into an aging industrial neighborhood filled with abandoned warehouses and forgotten buildings. Snow drifted across empty streets. Most businesses in the area had closed years earlier. Eventually, Buddy turned down a narrow road lined with rusted chain-link fences. At the end stood a large brick warehouse. Several windows were boarded shut. The building looked abandoned, yet smoke rose from a chimney near the rear. "Someone's here," Emily whispered. Buddy immediately trotted toward the entrance. Before they reached the door, it opened. An elderly woman stepped outside. The moment she saw Buddy, tears filled her eyes. Oh, thank God. She hurried forward and wrapped her arms around the dog. Buddy leaned against her, exhausted, relieved. "Where have you been?" she whispered. Then she noticed Walter and Emily. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The woman looked from one face to the other before finally nodding. "So he found you?" Walter frowned. "Found us?" The woman glanced at Buddy. "I always wondered if he'd know what to do." Emily's pulse quickened. "Do what?" The woman stepped aside. "Come inside." The warehouse interior shocked them. Instead of an abandoned building, they discovered a fully functioning community center. Tables filled one side of the room. Shelves stocked with food, blankets, clothing, and medical supplies lined the walls. Volunteers moved quietly between workstations preparing meals. Several looked up and smiled when they saw Buddy. It was obvious they knew him well. "What is this place?" Walter asked. "A promise," the woman replied softly. The answer felt strangely familiar. She introduced herself as Margaret Bennett, no relation to Walter, a retired teacher. Then she led them toward a small office overlooking the warehouse floor. Photographs covered the walls. Most showed volunteers helping homeless residents throughout Chicago. Many included Buddy. Then Walter stopped. Hanging above the desk was the same man from the photograph inside the pouch. "Who's he?" Margaret smiled sadly. "His name was Henry Collins." Emily immediately recognized the past tense. "Was?" Margaret nodded. "Henry passed away 8 months ago." Walter looked at Buddy. "That was his owner?" "Yes." Margaret sat down slowly. "And the man who's been feeding you for nearly 10 years. Walter froze. Emily's notebook slipped slightly in her hands. 10 years? Margaret nodded. Long before Buddy started delivering food, Henry personally brought meals to people throughout the city. She opened a drawer and removed a worn notebook. "You were one of the first." Walter stared in disbelief. "I never met him." Margaret's eyes softened. "Actually, you did." She flipped through several pages before turning the notebook around. Tucked inside was an old photograph taken nearly 9 years earlier. It showed a younger Walter sitting outside a church shelter, speaking with a smiling man holding Buddy's leash. Walter's eyes widened. "I remember him." "Henry remembered you too," Margaret said. Silence filled the room. For years, Walter believed a mysterious stranger had been helping him. Now he learned that stranger had been quietly watching over him for nearly a decade. Then Emily remembered the note. "Why send us here now?" Margaret's expression changed. The sadness returned immediately. She looked down at Buddy. "Because Henry left instructions." "What kind of instructions?" Emily asked. Margaret hesitated. Then she reached into a cabinet and removed a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Henry's handwriting, were 5 simple words. "Open when Buddy finds Walter." Suddenly the mystery became much bigger than a dog delivering food. And judging by the look on Margaret's face, whatever waited inside that envelope was about to change Walter Hayes' life forever. Walter Hayes stared at the envelope as though it might disappear if he looked away. For several moments, nobody moved. The warehouse office was silent except for the distant sounds of volunteers working below. Buddy lay beside Margaret's desk, exhausted from whatever journey had kept him away for 4 days. Yet despite his fatigue, the golden retriever watched the envelope carefully, almost as if he already knew what it contained. Emily Carter felt her heart pounding. "How long have you had that?" Margaret gently ran her fingers across the envelope. "Almost 8 months." Walter looked confused. "Since Henry died?" Margaret nodded. "The day before he passed away, he gave me very specific instructions." She swallowed hard. "He told me that if Buddy ever disappeared and later returned with Walter, I was supposed to open this envelope in front of him." Silence returned. Emily glanced at Buddy. "He planned all of this?" "Apparently." Margaret looked toward the dog. "Though, I don't think even Henry expected Buddy to wait this long." Walter slowly sat down. "Open it." Margaret nodded and carefully broke the seal. Inside rested several folded pages, a property deed, a bank document, and an old photograph. Walter frowned. None of it made sense. Margaret unfolded the first letter and began reading aloud. "If you're hearing this, then Buddy finally found Walter. First, Walter. If you're sitting there wondering who I am, don't feel bad. We only spoke a handful of times over the years. You probably don't remember me very well. I remember you." Walter's eyes remained fixed on the paper. Henry's words continued. "Nearly 10 years ago, I met a stubborn homeless veteran who refused free money. but spent 2 hours helping me unload food supplies during a snowstorm. Afterward, I learned he slept outside because every shelter bed was full. I promised myself I would check on him whenever I could. Walter lowered his head. The memory slowly returned. A church parking lot, boxes of supplies, a man with a dog. Henry. Emily listened silently as Margaret continued reading. Over the years, Henry quietly followed Walter's story. He learned about the loss of Walter's wife, the factory closure, the health problems, the distance that grew between Walter and his children. More importantly, Henry never stopped believing Walter deserved another chance. Then came the sentence that changed everything. 3 years ago, I purchased a building. Walter frowned. Margaret unfolded the property deed lying beneath the letter. Her eyes widened immediately. Oh my God. Emily leaned closer. The document showed ownership of a small apartment building on Chicago's west side. Walter looked completely lost. What does that have to do with me? Margaret slowly turned the next page. Everything. The building contains 12 apartments. One of them belongs to Walter Hayes. The room fell silent. Walter blinked several times. What? Margaret looked up. Tears filled her eyes. Henry bought you an apartment. Walter laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. No. Margaret handed him the deed. Yes. Walter stared at the paperwork. His hands trembled. For years he had slept outside train stations, under bridges, and inside temporary shelters. Now someone was telling him he owned an apartment. Emily could hardly believe it herself. Then Margaret discovered another document, a trust fund, not large enough to make anyone wealthy, but more than enough to cover rent, utilities, groceries, and basic expenses for years. Walter looked overwhelmed. Why would he do this? Margaret smiled sadly. Keep reading. Henry's letter answered immediately. Because everyone deserves a place to come home to, especially people who spent too long believing nobody cared. Walter covered his face. For several moments he couldn't speak. Downstairs, the sounds of volunteers continued. The city continued. Life continued. Yet inside that office, everything had changed. Then Emily noticed something attached to the final page. Another address. Different from the warehouse. Different from the apartment building. Margaret, she said quietly. There's more. Margaret looked down. Henry's final instructions filled the last page. If Walter is willing, take him to the second address. Buddy knows the way. The 3 adults exchanged confused looks. Another address? Walter asked. Margaret nodded. Looks that way. Buddy immediately stood up. His tail wagged, for the first time all morning. Emily laughed softly. I guess that's our answer. Walter looked at the dog. You already knew, didn't you? Buddy barked once. Margaret folded the letter carefully. Henry spent months preparing all of this before he died. For Walter? Emily asked. Not just Walter. Margaret opened a filing cabinet and pulled out dozens of similar folders. Names filled every drawer. Veterans, elderly residents, homeless individuals, people Henry had quietly helped throughout Chicago. He made plans for everyone. Emily stared. The warehouse wasn't simply a charity center. It was part of something much bigger. A network Henry had built long before his death. A system designed to keep helping people even after he was gone. Then Buddy walked toward the office door. He stopped and looked back, waiting. The same way he had looked at Walter outside Union Station. The same way he had looked at Emily when she followed him through the snow. Walter slowly stood. Looks like he wants us to keep going. Margaret smiled through tears. I think Henry still has one more surprise waiting. Nobody knew exactly where the second address would lead. But judging by the way Buddy's tail continued wagging, whatever waited there had been part of his mission all along. Less than an hour later, Walter Hayes sat in the passenger seat of Margaret's truck, while Buddy rested in the back. Emily Carter followed behind in her own vehicle. Snow continued falling across Chicago as they traveled west toward the second address Henry Collins had left behind. None of them knew what to expect. The apartment building had already been unbelievable. Walter still struggled to accept that someone had quietly planned a future for him years before. Yet the look on Margaret's face suggested even she didn't know the full extent of Henry's final arrangements. Did he ever tell you about this address? Emily asked over the phone while they drove. Never, Margaret replied. Henry kept certain projects completely private. 20 minutes later, Buddy suddenly sat upright. His tail began moving against the seat. Walter noticed immediately. We're close. Margaret smiled. How do you know? Walter glanced back at the dog. Look at him. The golden retriever looked more excited than anyone had seen in days. Eventually, the vehicles turned onto a quiet residential street lined with small brick houses and leafless trees. Most homes appeared modest but well cared for. Children played in front yards despite the cold. Neighbors shoveled snow from sidewalks. It felt like the kind of neighborhood where people still knew each other's names. Then Buddy barked. Margaret slowed the truck. The address matched a 2-story brick house sitting near the end of the block. Fresh paint covered the exterior. New windows reflected the winter sunlight. A small sign stood near the front walkway. The Maple Street Community House. Walter frowned. What's this? Nobody had an answer. Buddy jumped from the truck the moment Margaret parked. The dog ran directly toward the front door. Before anyone could knock, it opened. A middle-aged woman stepped outside. The moment she saw Buddy, she smiled. Well, it's about time. Emily exchanged a confused look with Walter. The woman laughed softly. Come inside. Henry said this day would eventually happen. That sentence immediately got everyone's attention. They followed her into the house. The interior felt warm and welcoming. A large kitchen occupied one side of the building. Several tables filled the dining area. Shelves stocked with books lined the walls. Framed photographs covered nearly every hallway. Many showed Henry. Many showed Buddy. Most showed people smiling. Families, veterans, elderly residents, children. The woman introduced herself as Rebecca Morales. I manage the house now. Walter looked around. What exactly is this place? Rebecca smiled. Henry's favorite project. They gathered around a large wooden table while Rebecca explained, nearly 6 years earlier, Henry purchased the property and quietly transformed it into a community center designed specifically for people rebuilding their lives after homelessness, financial hardship, or personal loss. Unlike shelters, residents could stay long-term while receiving help with employment, housing, medical care, and counseling. Henry hated temporary solutions. Rebecca explained. He wanted people to have a real chance. Emily scribbled notes furiously. Every answer seemed to reveal another secret. How many people have come through here? Rebecca smiled. Over 200. Walter looked stunned. 200? Most are living independently now. Then Rebecca stood. Actually, there's something Henry wanted Walter to see. She disappeared into another room and returned carrying a thick binder. Across the front was a handwritten label. Walter Hayes. The old man froze. What is that? Rebecca placed it in front of him. Your file. Walter opened it slowly. Inside were years of notes. Not surveillance. Not records. Observation. Conversation. Ideas. Plans. Henry had documented every interaction they ever shared. Every concern Walter mentioned. Every dream he believed was no longer possible. Walter turned pages in disbelief. Then he reached a section dated 3 years earlier. Attached was a photograph. A much younger Walter stood beside a woman. His wife. Tears immediately filled his eyes. Beneath the photograph sat a handwritten note from Henry. Ask Walter about Michigan. He smiles every time he talks about it. Walter lowered his head. I haven't seen this picture in years. Rebecca nodded. Henry found it after tracking down an old friend of yours. Emily sat speechless. The level of care felt extraordinary. Then Walter reached the final section of the binder. There, tucked inside a plastic sleeve, rested a letter, addressed to him. He recognized Henry's handwriting immediately. With trembling hands, he opened it. The room fell silent. If you're reading this, Walter, then Buddy did his job. I hope you're sitting somewhere warm. If not, stop reading and go inside. Walter laughed despite his tears. The humor felt unmistakably Henry. The letter continued. For years you told everyone you didn't need help. Maybe you believed it. Maybe you were afraid of disappointment. I understand. Life gave you more than your share of losses. But here's something I need you to know. Losing your home never made you worthless. Being homeless never made you invisible. And growing old never made you forgotten. Walter wiped his eyes. The words struck harder than he expected. Then came the final paragraph. The apartment is yours. The support fund is yours. But those aren't my final gifts. This house is, not the building, the people inside it. Every person here knows what it feels like to lose something important. Every person here knows what it means to start over. You don't need charity, Walter. You need community. Welcome home. Nobody spoke after Margaret finished reading. The room remained silent except for the sound of Walter quietly crying. Then something unexpected happened. Buddy walked over and rested his head on Walter's knee. The old man wrapped both arms around the dog. "You knew all along," he whispered. Buddy's tail moved gently. Rebecca smiled. "Actually, there's one more thing." Everyone looked up. She pointed toward a photograph hanging on the wall across the room. The image showed Henry, Buddy, and a group of volunteers standing beside a sign. Emily stepped closer to read it. "The Henry Collins Foundation." She turned back toward Rebecca. "Foundation?" Rebecca nodded. "Henry left enough funding to keep the warehouse, this house, and several outreach programs running for at least 10 years. Walter stared. Emily stared. Margaret stared. Even after his death, Henry was still taking care of people, still planning, still helping. And somehow, through all of it, Buddy had been carrying the final pieces of that mission, one sunrise at a time. The story spread across Chicago faster than anyone expected. Emily Carter published her article less than a week after discovering Henry Collins's hidden plans. And within days, thousands of people were sharing it. What began as a mystery about a dog delivering food to a homeless veteran became something much larger. It became the story of a man who spent years quietly helping strangers and a loyal dog who refused to let that mission end after his owner was gone. Donations poured into the Henry Collins Foundation. Local businesses offered support. Churches volunteered resources. Veteran organizations contacted Rebecca Morales and Margaret Bennett, asking how they could help. For the first time, many of the people Henry had spent years supporting found themselves surrounded by an entire community. Walter Hayes struggled to adjust to his new life. After nearly 4 years on the streets, sleeping in a warm apartment felt strange. He still woke before sunrise. He still expected cold concrete beneath his blanket. Yet every morning Buddy appeared outside his door. The dog had somehow transferred his routine from Union Station to Walter's new home without missing a beat. Emily visited often, partly for interviews, mostly because she genuinely enjoyed spending time with Walter. Over cups of coffee, he shared stories from his military service, his marriage, and the decades before life fell apart. For the first time in years, people weren't seeing Walter as a homeless man. They were seeing him as a person. One afternoon in early spring, Walter sat on a park bench while Buddy rested beside him. Children played nearby. The city felt different somehow, brighter, more hopeful. Walter scratched behind the dog's ears. "You know," he said quietly, "you saved me." Buddy looked up. Walter smiled, not just with the food. The dog's tail thumped gently against the grass. Across Chicago, Henry's plans continued unfolding. More housing assistance became available. Medical outreach programs expanded. Several veterans received permanent housing. Elderly residents living alone gained regular support visits. The warehouse became busier than ever. Everywhere Emily looked, she found evidence of one simple truth. Henry's kindness had not ended with his death. It had multiplied through volunteers, through community members, through people inspired by his example, and through Buddy. Yet as spring turned into summer, everyone began noticing something else. Buddy was getting older. The golden retriever still completed his daily rounds, but more slowly now. Gray fur covered much of his face. Long walks left him tired. Some afternoons he slept for hours beneath the shade trees outside the community house. Walter noticed it first. "He's slowing down," Rebecca nodded sadly. "He's almost 14. For a dog his size, that was remarkable. Still, nobody wanted to imagine life without him. Then, one morning in late August, Buddy failed to appear outside Walter's apartment. The old man immediately felt uneasy. He grabbed his jacket and headed toward the community house. There he found Rebecca, Margaret, Emily, and several volunteers gathered beneath a large oak tree in the backyard. Buddy lay peacefully on a blanket. The moment Walter saw him, he understood. The dog wasn't suffering. He wasn't frightened. He simply looked tired, very tired. Walter slowly sat beside him. "Hey, Buddy." Buddy opened his eyes. His tail moved once. Emily wiped tears from her face. Rebecca held Henry's final notebook in her hands. Earlier that morning, while organizing foundation records, she discovered one last note tucked between the pages. A note addressed to Buddy. Her voice trembled as she read it aloud. "Buddy, if you're hearing this, then you're probably pretending not to listen while understanding every word. Thank you for helping me take care of our friends. Thank you for never giving up on people. And thank you for being the best partner I could have ever asked for. When you think they're going to be okay without us, you can finally rest." Nobody spoke after she finished. They simply sat together beneath the tree. Walter rested one hand on Buddy's side. The dog's breathing remained calm. Peaceful. Hours passed. People came and went. Some shared stories, others sat quietly. As evening approached, the golden light of sunset filtered through the branches overhead. Buddy slowly lifted his head one final time. His eyes moved across the people gathered around him. Walter, Emily, Rebecca, Margaret, volunteers, friends. The community his owner had worked so hard to build. Then his gaze settled on Walter, the same man he had fed every morning for nearly 10 years. Walter smiled through tears. "We're okay now." Buddy's tail moved once, just once. Then he rested his head against Walter's arm. A few moments later, beneath the shade of the oak tree and surrounded by people who loved him, Buddy quietly slipped away. The news spread through Chicago by morning. Hundreds attended the memorial held outside the community house. Some brought flowers, others brought photographs. Many simply came to say thank you, not because Buddy was famous, not because he was extraordinary in the way newspapers usually define greatness, but because he had reminded people that kindness matters, loyalty matters, showing up for others matters. Several months later, a bronze statue was placed outside the entrance of the Henry Collins Foundation. It showed a golden retriever carrying a paper bag in his mouth. Beneath it were engraved 8 simple words. Buddy, the dog who never stopped caring. Every morning afterward, people arriving at the foundation passed the statue before beginning their work, delivering meals, visiting veterans, helping families, continuing Henry's mission. And every single day, Walter Hayes stopped for a moment before entering the building. He touched the statue gently and said the same words, "Morning, Buddy," because some deliveries never truly end. Some promises continue long after the people who made them are gone. And sometimes, the greatest legacy a person can leave behind is a simple act of kindness, carried faithfully into every new sunrise. Sometimes the greatest acts of kindness happen where nobody is looking. They are not announced on television. They are not celebrated by crowds. They happen quietly, one person helping another, one meal at a time, one act of compassion at a time. Henry Collins understood that better than most people. For years, he walked the streets of Chicago helping people many others had forgotten. He never asked for recognition. He never wanted attention. He simply believed that every human being deserved dignity, hope, and the knowledge that somebody cared, even after his death. That belief continued changing lives. But he never understood foundations, trust funds, housing programs, or newspaper articles. He never understood why people called him a hero. What he understood was loyalty. He understood that every morning Henry carried food to people who needed it. He understood that Walter mattered. He understood that the people in Henry's notebooks mattered. And when Henry was gone, Buddy continued doing the only thing he knew how to do. He kept showing up, day after day, sunrise after sunrise, through snowstorms, freezing temperatures, rain, and loneliness. He carried a promise across the streets of Chicago. Walter Hayes spent years believing the world had forgotten him. Many people living on the streets feel that way. They become invisible to busy crowds. People pass by without learning their names, hearing their stories, or understanding how they arrived there. Yet every morning, Buddy arrived with proof that someone remembered, someone cared enough to come back tomorrow. Then the next day, then the day after that. Sometimes, hope begins with something as simple as consistency. Emily Carter discovered that the most powerful stories are often hidden in plain sight. She started by following a dog carrying a paper bag. What she found instead was an entire network of compassion built by one man and protected by one loyal companion. The mystery was never about where the food came from. The mystery was about why someone would spend years helping strangers without expecting anything in return. The answer was simple. Because kindness matters. Because people matter. Because every life has value. Henry's final gift was never the apartment building, the trust fund, or the community house. Those things changed lives, but they were only tools. His real gift was reminding people that they belonged somewhere, that they were seen, that they were worth helping. Walter found a home, veterans found support, families found stability, volunteers found purpose. An entire city found inspiration in a golden retriever who refused to abandon his owner's mission. Perhaps that is why stories like this stay with us. They remind us that changing a life does not always require wealth or power. Sometimes it begins with noticing someone others overlook. Sometimes it begins with listening. Sometimes it begins with a warm meal delivered before sunrise. And sometimes it begins with a faithful dog carrying a paper bag through the streets of Chicago because he refuses to let a promise die. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever experienced a small act of kindness that changed your life? Have you ever known a dog whose loyalty inspired everyone around them? We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories about loyal dogs, forgotten heroes, second chances, faith, family, and the extraordinary power of compassion. May God bless you and your loved ones, comfort those who feel alone, strengthen those helping others, and remind all of us that no act of kindness is ever wasted. And may you never forget that sometimes the brightest light in a city appears just before sunrise, carried by a faithful friend who refuses to stop caring for one more person